Hi.
Hi.
Okay.
Okay.
Do opening prayers first. Xin Jin Tam Je Dewa Dan Jin Dong Har Dan Ra Nyo De La Na Mi Pa Tang Da Pai Do Pe San Jo Rum Bo Je Do Par So.
All meta sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly will I establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood.
Gewala koi titere ne sonde nyamo san da zamje barda lengaison gewala ko.
Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind.
Oi sanje jedan sojen jonan la sanjoy pade tane jasanje dage jin so jibe sonanje dola pinso sanje no ba yo.
In the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings.
Oi saye peje soye me do do ra le ye nye de jimbande sanje hen la me de pa ye no go nanda hen de je wo yo.
The ground is sprinkled with scented water and strewn with flowers. It is adorned with Meru, the supreme mountain, the four continents, and the sun and the moon. As a Buddha field, I offer it. May all sentient beings attain the happiness of the Buddha fields.
Oi simje namje samba dan lo ye se da je da wa je jon te mon te ba ye je jen go lo go do zo.
Please turn the wheel of the Dharma, of the two vehicles and their combination, according to the dispositions and likewise the mental capacities of sentient beings.
Ngomba to je je ne ba tam je je ba tuen ba bo so na yong tin jam de je de yin che la chan sa lo. To ban de ja tra we je ke we ngi song le ro yen che do dong dan chong ja ba xie je che la sa tam sa lo. Zhuo ne zhou we la yang la ba da la ra tu. 现个当白云的去跟着那样上za罗，到今家就得了那罗他妈把马拉去这个我把蒙着把家安中把卡就那么那啷个上za，说明之前就不然的都是上去跟着我呢，那是就讲我说的这把早那么那那个上za，昨天早晚那么儿我就那个叫别人听讲的，可能就是可能就说。 高中途经我这早读书，水松东啊，见到去见见，人家说没不叫我的老说，曾经都在牛头大见那咱不能见人都早读。Tajidela everyone.
Ashidele.
Tere nga zo ta pardo ke yeba cheka pardo ke ko tela to yore. Tene cheka pardo se de ta ngara o sharing Katelata, Sheval, Tinkine, the Mashika Parok, the Partella, Tanedan Kanda Yunga Yoba. Teni Tela Che, Yanes and Kanda Segoa, Tikola, Damga Senanda, Tablam Senanda, Tatela Pardoke, Cheka Pardoke trees in Tender Riva, Teni Te and do Tata Savat in Andana. Jema Dalan Cheka Pardon, Chadunder, Kunla Chaksan Hinzin Bansen. Damga Sarvangala Mayenjo, Rare Jemi Namka Insum Po, Duze Chata, Ludan Talake, Mada Jumayimba Hipar Sas, or the Cheka Pardo Cola, Dom Sengdo, Sasek Terry.
So today we begin with come to the fourth of the 6 Bardos, which is the Bardo of the moment before death, Bardo of Dying. So that period begins when it is certain that you're going to die, and it lasts until the moment you die. And so again, there are special instructions, like skillful practices, depending on the state of mind that we are in that moment and how we should practice during that time. So these instructions are called the instructions on the Bardo of the moment before death. And in the root verses, it says, "Now when the Bardo of the moment before death dawns upon me, I will abandon all grasping, yearning, and attachment, enter undistracted into clear awareness of the teaching, and eject my consciousness into the space of unborn mind. As I leave this compound body of flesh and blood, I will know it to be a transitory illusion."
Cheka Pardo, the Chijimba Tachune, Mashika Paro, T. Damga Yembare. Tini Tela, Kajun Chigoyopa, Kandase Hakorisana, Tanchiva Taktabsena, Nangamoyena, Tata Naji, Tate Tingrap, Mimba Naji, or Ta Sarvo Lap Turkoyo Mariwa, Nangamoyena, Sodjunk Mchi, the Soka Tatak Mchi Naji Sena, Tachupos in the Lap Turkoyo Mariji. Nini, Mamboji, Lapa de Chunian Sini, MJ la Tinga Yomar Chuni. Tane went Batan, Rechutan, Tendela. Then Natsala Subaswayina, Natsalam Chella Subatundungani. But there you go. Tende into the Nekadu shit, Hako Yomar, Telatine, Chava Tak Taus in the sort Tendeka Yang. So that the Karsico Chindo Yori.
So the Bardo of Dying, so is the period from the time where it is certain that you're going to die until one actually dies. So these are instructions concerning this period. And so how does one know that one is going to die for certain? So in the old days now, and therefore also in this text, there are certain indications whereby we infer that death is coming. And so in the old days, it of course wasn't the way it is now. So at that time, one couldn't tell for sure whether or not one is going to die. We didn't have, there were no doctors like today who can determine that. So that's one. And then secondly, also at that time, most people, and in particular Dharma practitioners, even if there is a doctor, they wouldn't even go to see the doctor. They mostly were in isolated places, like in mountain retreats and so on. So when one would fall ill and be sick, then one would just practice with the sickness, taking it as the path and just stay with it. And of course, one doesn't really know when exactly one is going to die, but there are certain indications that indicate that the time is coming. And so because of the circumstances at that time, there is a special instruction just for those indications.
Tata Rawayena, Pinchava Taktab Court of Mahina, Kayo Marwa, Tatirap Sierra Latin, Tinrap Mimbake, Sapo Lap Tuguyore. Then it take under Karasen Hako go Yoresena, Tatanga son check up Bardo, Damate, Hoanyamnis Jute, so Terry de Ore. Then it Shiva think Kivijisu, Poanyamnis and Tenroya Tiore, then Shiva think kids have a Jisumato. Ko hili tu chola malab ngunlang po nyamnesena ten daga yu mara yese yore tela tene chiju ting kiwa ge jisu tene ten po nyamnesena tan ro thomna ten resena ro go yore sen tela tene tene chiwa tak tap te yo go bujum sin tere.
And so nowadays, even if one doesn't know all of these signs, these indications, it is okay, because nowadays science has developed and doctors can tell us with a high degree of certainty exactly like how long we have to live. But now regarding these instructions on the Bardo of Dying, the main instructions on the Bardo of Dying are the poem instructions, the transference of consciousness. And so it is said that ideally one practices poem when it is certain that one is going to die, and just before one dies. But it is said that one should not actually practice poem before it is certain that one is going to die. So if one is able, one manages to know that one is certain to die, so after it is certain to die, then that's the time when one should practice poem. And so, so in any case, even though nowadays we have the indications that when we're going to die, still there's this instruction on what things kind of to watch out for as kind of signals or indications.
Tene tan chewa hako chewa lego yoba hako kona yang tene chiblusine tan chewa de dog tapke yang chiblusine de mashiv tamra wasiyaji yorwa te nipa to siguro resi tambo te tema kaheje se te ga yang tene chewa dog mundung na tene powa nyamne se ne tan powa rimpa mambo nyamne dina ne songo yore rek mambo tende kanron che nyamne se ne tene ta powa nyamne se ba ko tula papa res te songo yore.
So when it is certain that one is going to die, so you know that death is coming. Even though you know that death is coming, it is said that first we have to apply methods to cheat death, to avert death. So one surely first has to try a few times to avert death. And if one is not able to avert death, even though one has tried a few times, then one begins with the practice of poem. And there are many different levels to poa, many different kinds of poa practice. One can practice any kind of poa practice when it is really when the time of death has come.
Tan chiwa le sujute ta chitang pe macheka nalo ni ta karasuguru chi dukyun rawo che jawa cheshun rawo che tende che shenang cheshun rawo che ta tende che ride yorwa teni ta so cheni shenang ta so cheni teni ta semdok so cheni ta shincha la so ba tende mangbo che genani teni shincha yo na yang pinto yo marwa ko tangne teni shendu go yore ta che ni ya chem nan chang ten da le zhuo ten da le jo pan jo gan zhe je yo na yang ngarang sem ni lu ma thang ma thong na yang pin tho me ba le teni gang da na ra wa me ba ka dan ro yo ta ten de je ge na dan le on bu kap su ta sem na pe ta do ma ri ngam tra re je ka le kha bo ma bu je yong ge yo re ta te la je che ka pa do su je na lo ten de je yong ge yo re 다 뒤에 값으더니 다 핀베 탑 가라 요래서는 다 대셔야 하는 거죠.
So this moment of death approaching, that is really a concept that is the worst thing to happen to us in our entire life. It's the biggest change. It's our greatest fear. So this is a time where we experience a lot of fear, and also, on the other hand, a lot of sadness, and also a lot of attachment, things that we can't let go of. But even though we are attached, it is useless. We need to let go and die. And at that time, it doesn't matter how much one has, one's family members, one's relatives, one's friends, one's money and possessions, all of that is useless because you have to let it go. And you have to separate from all of these without any freedom over it. So when you come to this point, the mind is experiencing a lot of fear and a lot of suffering, a lot of difficulties in the mind. So a lot of all kinds of things arise in the mind during the Bardo of Dying. So these are therefore instructions as to what kind of practice, what kind of method would be beneficial at that time.
어쨌든 가서티 전에 발도 값은 냠래 삼아 단 제가 발도 값 빈토 빈배치다 냠래 야보 존스는 제가 발도 값 동안 모용 근데 찬도 요르바 제니 되게 담제 제가 발도 그 냠래로 트린다고서 차고 요래 니네 담 맥사도 가서 단 차알레 렙디다 다들 가르고 요래서나 다 힘바단 차과 뭐제와 그탑 nga zu xie zai ba ji su de ni ta ba to mu to ba ge ge zuo de xin cha den de le de ne yong ge you de den de da da ni zong de da da nga zu ran wang yu ba ga bu su ni da ji mang bu de nga ran zo ge ji yu ze bam jiu le xin cha de lu mu tong den de rin ge you de wa den de da da ni pa sa bu zuo ne de ni yong gen dong ne da 公交生党南区吧，对面那个这他叫我的，办公都说了马金吧，对面那个他这我呢叫我了，就是那个出发车当天办的啊，等着了吧，现在，简单的我让做没新车店都啥个有，没办的等着，做过就得被搞清楚这。대차가 요래 가르시 된다 제스는 나랑 그 직다 주바다 젠바라서 봐 신다 시 모터바 된다 제 옛나야 된다 그 내단지 옛나야 샘거나니 루탄 샘거나니 마 주바 뭐야 맨다 그 초던 뭐야다 샘거나니 루탄야 되니 다 나랑 쳔 그 내단도 라틴에 제 마음 바게 점차 나무도 버지 요대와 된다 제는 파사보 존에 나랑 해서 그 지수 녀다 매용 와지다 나랑 제 해당당 차도라서 봐 텔레틴 제무고 봐 된다 그다 다다 망보 지게 마쇼 가는 사보 존에 야보스 이거도 되게 담지 배 갈점보 제가 값어 제가 봐도 단테 해자 차버지스 되니 신차 매용 타바 토야 라 빈토요 봐도 저단지 배 가침 붙여야 돼요.
Actually, all the instructions that we have received in the Bardo, throughout the entire Bardo of living, basically all the instructions that we do in our lifetime, all the practices that we do really are for the sake of this moment, the Bardo of dying. Because if throughout one's life one was able to practice well, then at the time of death, when one comes to the Bardo of dying, one will not suffer so much. And actually all the instructions we receive, therefore, in our entire life really are instructions for the Bardo of Dying. And so now what is really the most important preparation for us to make for that time, the time of dying? What's most important is to apply various methods to become free of clinging attachment, so that clinging attachment does not arise when we die. Because after you have died, it is clinging attachment that is the main hindrance to your liberation. And therefore, right now, where we still have the opportunity, the freedom to do so, we should start with that right away. Make our preparations, make everything clear. For example, many people don't want to let go of their money and their possessions. So it's best to make it clear already now before you come to the moment of dying. If you have some wealth, for example, you can make offerings to the 3 jewels, or you can be generous to the poor, to the beggars, and so on. Or you can make donations to an authentic charity that helps the poor. And basically, what is important is to have nothing to be attached to, that you are attached to when you die. And so even if you're not able to make a lot of offerings or donations or be generous and so on, what's most important is that you let go with your mind, that your mind makes offerings in the form of a mandala, for example. And also in your family life, it is good to make everything clear for the future, so that after I have died, there will not be any problems with the children and so on, whatever there is left behind. So basically, you must make sure that through various family relations, the emotions of anger and jealousy and so on will not arise. And so it would be good to really to do that. And there are actually a lot of people who make things very clear before they die, and that's really very important. So when we die, and we die without attachment, clinging attachment, then this is the greatest benefit for us in order to attain liberation.
ngazo chitang ma so yena ta shiba de pe shena ta jikta cheshu chigriwa yena chupa yakbo je chaso na rang semdang nyamle yakbo je jule jene chupa je chaso yena shiba se jo de hira hena jin mare tata de chupa mambo je de so yo rewa kartang koni la pare ngazo ta nyin ka ta nyin nang ta mulam che pa me pa ta jo ta de ta ge ta da che na wan de da tham che yo ma na yin ta jo de zo le de so gong song na de ni ba do se ne xie wa se jo de me sa kan ya ma re ji de song gong ga song yo pa wa se en de ta se ma ba do song jik do bu nam jo la se ngo ne se ne da wo re se ko so 다때 인바라 인바 희송 그베 냠린 괜제 얘나 최근 참조 사죠 메시 셔발람나 야믹사티 세고야 가야 요 말이스 대저 다 사미지 남조 로리 데스 나 가데나 로 데오예 로로 예스 대냥가 저 데모 저그 양은 뭐지 송리와 디나한테는 대요래.
So normally ordinary people are really afraid of dying. This is really our greatest fear. And however, if one really becomes a good Dharma practitioner, if one is really able to practice well, then actually you will not be so afraid when dying comes. Actually, many Dharma practitioners have said that. So the last weeks we have talked about to see all waking state, our daytime appearances and the dream appearances as not different, and to see all appearances as illusory by nature. So if one has habituated to that in one's life, then actually the Bardo and dying are actually, one doesn't see them as something so special. Jigten Sungan had said, I'm a yogin who has realized this life, the Bardo, and future lives to be one. They are actually quite the same. So a person who recognizes that, then Jigten Sungan's quote continues, for them, at the time of death, there is nothing special to do. I, a yogin, am blissful. My mind is happy in this effortless state of non-action. So such a yogin is always happy. Also, recently, Gachin Rinpoche gave teachings on Milarepa songs on how a yogin is always happy. So that's very similar.
Oh, dan nyamle ngode phowa nyamle si jute. Tene che tang phowa ta pache mambo ko nyong yo jore. Nyamle jang nyong yo jore. Tene tata ndi nang pardo tu tre ga nang tin che ka pardo kon phowa te la yang te sa man da wa ji do. De la kandren do se na ta ngarang mixa ke che yadang ko la sa ya ta to kan yo so mo do. Che tang lu de tong ra gong cha du tene za wo ma ya ji ma ji da nam jung ko po na yin gom tene te wa go ho za sun gun dun do tene ta ngarang ke chi nam chi gong wo tele ka po kal serven dang dang din ba ji song do tende ji tele ji gom tene ji zuk de na rang ge de pa che shu ge da za la ma de do dian chang ge jin cha jin ji tende ji ge za la ma de do dian chang ge nam ba ji de gom tene da da bu ga ge se ge yo ra da go ge lu ge da bu ga ge te cha ma tene hong re ge ga yo san ba si就做个杂文嘛的ham也ham有啊，说南句，我的都冇咁不告诉 ham， 一个 ham 过头了点的话就有啊，真的这个的杂文嘛的，就做了真的就有300岁，没把点着我这是个个人说的。
So the instructions, the actual instructions here are the POA instructions. And you've probably heard a lot about POA and probably also practiced POA before. The POA instructions here in the teachings of the Six Bardos are a little bit different than we usually do. Here, we actually do not visualize ourselves in the form of the Yidam deity, but we simply visualize, we meditate on our body as being empty. And then we visualize the central channel, just like in the normal POA practice. And below the navel, where the 3 channels converge, there is a white bindu, a drop that is a golden radiant, and that has the essence of your consciousness. So that's below the navel. And then above your crown is the root guru that you have the greatest devotion to, appearing with the ornaments and in the form of the Buddha Chodara. And so once you visualize that, next you visualize that the 9 doors, the 9 openings of your body are locked with Hung syllables, each with a Hung syllable. And at your crown, inside the central channel in the crown level, is an upside down hum syllable, the same hum syllable that we encounter during the Dumo practice, so facing downward. So visualize in this way your empty body, the central channel, and this syllable at the crown.
남주 가진 포화텔라 티 남식은 어떻게 때 니갈 공고 니갈 공고 다들 때오라 작성 눈도 되는 성에도 와 작성 눈도 되는 디틀레 갈란 서바트곰 되니 나랑 zubu게 다다티 태원게 신라가 자데마 닌시 라바니까 된데선 니 니테 코처자 효침보스 코처자 대대니 라이드는 요 zubu야 상상세 되니 월롱양팅 월롱팅스는 다디 효자르와 월롱양팅 오고 쯤니 월롱양팅네 되니 나니 다다 스지테 장망부 세네 드네 세네 바 인도 다다 틀레데 양로네 양로네 되니 디 함들 톡 사시 고레스 되니 까존에 양마바 된데세네 베 양니 양도 다다단 포와 양거 요로와가서 포와 자네 되니 셔카 바도 갑선 포와 자는 로스발라 당부 여부 양고레 상고르와 된데세네 양니 양도 다 데이터베이스는 양고레 예송요레.
So normally when we practice poem, the consciousness is at our heart center in the form of a bindu. Here, the bindu, which is your consciousness, is below the navel where the three channels converge. And it is white with golden radiance. And then, so you visualize that. Then you press your thumbs against the inner side of your ring fingers, forming a fist, drawing in the two middle fingers forming a fist, like a threatening mudra, a very tight fist like this, and then you place your fists onto your thighs, and your body is straight, and then you are pulling up the lower winds. So you have to contract the muscles, apply some force, close the lower gate that way. And then with your speech, you are saying out loud, pet several times, again and again, like 7 times and so on. And every time you say pet, then the bindu moves gradually further and further up until it reaches the hum syllable. And then once it reaches the hum syllable, you say ga, and the bindu descends back down. And so this is what you should practice again and again. And so the poem practice is something that we have to train in right now. If we want to be able to use it at the time of death, then we have to become very adept in the training right now. So for this reason, we have to practice it again and again. Tata long dang, make badang, Samson, Tito Denny, Denny Namkigo, Ya, Zawaman, Yanro, Mamba, Telepe, Sancha, or Topatic Sigori. And so one begins with, when one moves the bindu up with the hum, one begins with 4 sets of 7. So 4 times 7 pets, so 28 times. That is how it is explained in the text. And while one is moving up the bindu and up and down the bindu, one visualizes So first, slowly, gradually, the pindo goes up gradually and slowly. So you habituate yourself to that by using these 4 sets of 7, those 28 pets. But later, once you have trained in that, once you're familiar with that, then you don't necessarily have to always practice those 7 sets of 4, those 28. Then you can just use a few pets to bring up the pindo, touch the hum, and then come back down. And so when you do this practice, the winds, your visualization, and the mind all are combined into one. So you focus on the essence of your consciousness as a pindo moving up and down the central channel. So this quality of clarity has to be there when you practice.
Ina kashi te kale kapu yon te yonga yo mare, sawa mare, kawando te tadon tsur ka se tuku yo mare. Tendu sona, te ma te ngo na jo tang te la sopa. Tendu sona, teni ham te ma goma che na. Ham te me pa che. Kato tikle te a ti lama dojin chang ke kola ya tuk tsam se na. Teni ka se ne ma pam na. Tendu se go re song do. Yena dada Karasagore, Dada Hamte Joe Zawama Kaka Me de Jayate, Tezakian, Karasagore Yang, Ninka me bandu Zoga Mareve, and San Yang Poa Nahisel Tondo Tender, Silica Ninka Yosari. Elatin Hamte Joan Gabdewat and this Mapasia, Jumsi Tensari.
So in this way, you train many times, and there are some who at some point then experience a sensation at the opening of the central channel at their crown. And so the crown actually opens somewhat, and for some, it is even possible to plant a grass stalk into the crown and it stays there. But then for many others, that doesn't happen. That is more difficult to happen. And their central channel doesn't open that way. But for example, if it happens that you experience headache and something like that, then it is also fine not to visualize the hum syllable. Then you can just visualize that the bindu goes directly to the body of the guru Vajradhara above your crown. And upon touching him with Ga, the bindu then descends back down. So the reason why one visualizes generally the upside down hum syllable in the central channel at the crown level is to ensure there is no danger, because then if there is nothing that blocks that door, it could happen that one's consciousness might almost leave one's body. So because there is a slight danger, that is why we visualize the upside down hum syllable.
So the nam hisela tondo siga yores, this tondo sindo yobuka, tano la de yores on yore. Then do tata de hamde yola gom dena ya ye chigres. Kantana yandan po nyamne sibukapso tambo de la aranzo pe semji yabosi yata. Tampo andela tene. Sempi mangu ke tabalana rinto bak tanda ki cheta mayor tezo yata teni tata kong jo ko te lama dojin chantela ta te pa mu che me ba te sanje tam je ke jizo yinpa, sam nying je ting, da nying yinpa. Tunda jilo samma tena, tela tepa tang mu. Teni maa je ngi song ke semjin tang, kowe semjin tang je la, samba tang nying je. Te nyi ke semde, ha jang ka chimbo re, ye song yore.
And when practicing Powa, it happens to a few people that they even lose consciousness, or something happens to them that they almost pass out, and then after that they're not like normal again. So these are signs of the consciousness almost leaving the body. So therefore, if you can visualize the hum at the crown, it is better. And so then when you actually practice Powa in the beginning, you should cultivate a good motivation, a motivation of bodhicitta. So you should think that I am engaging in this practice of Powa so that I can bring many countless sentient beings to the place of liberation. And then after having cultivated such a motivation, then also cultivate faith and devotion, immeasurable faith and devotion to the Guru Vajradhara above your crown. And think that this Guru really embodies all the Buddhas. He embodies love and compassion. So those two are very important. That is, cultivate this fervent faith and devotion, and to cultivate loving compassion for all sentient beings in the three lower realms, all samsaric sentient beings.
Teni taten din puwa, da dago ke nyamne sena, da te mene ke nga tso namjun, da an puwa nja tsok ma. Nga ran doje pamolo gong yang puwa, da te mambu jang jirwa. Tende jek sena, da chepa yo ma re, kare tab de dana nga ran la. Teni yinje meje doje pamolo gong yang ma re, yedang karong tine se gomne puwa jang ya yo re, tende jek dona nga ran la karen chamshu re dana, tende jek nyamne sen. Poa chama te ta che idea ndo te chikpa ra ba ti sile yang chikpa re te ndu ta tang bo te la ngarang ya bu che jang chu ba che jang go yo re.
And so you can practice this Powa practice, or you can also practice whichever Powa you normally do. So normally we practice the poem of planting the grass stalk. And in that Powa, we visualize ourselves as Vajravarahi, Vajrayogini. And so many of you have probably practiced this Powa before. So it doesn't make a difference which Powa you practice, whichever comes easier to you. And actually, you don't even necessarily have to visualize Vajravarahi. You can visualize any Yidam deity, such as Chenrezig, whichever one you are naturally closest to. So the general idea of all Powa practice is the same. The activity that is performed is the same. The function is the same. So what's important is that in the beginning, first, I have to train in any Powa practice well.
Ta sherin ba gab so na ta je nam to tang che ta ka nga mang bo je tende yong go yo re le la wo sen tende sa te ya ka le kha bo re te yena ta ni sang chu pa che ya bu jang song chan na te ni te gab so ya ten song da wo se te se le lao cha go yo je re ten ju ta pe na nga so ta je za dan ro che bu gab so ro sa ga lang ga penang kangpa la tendo wa mega tsena kangpa mega tsipa kapsu go tong sa che yore wa ti langkan ro sa ken bab sa che yore wa te zuwa na yin te zuwa ma che te la nga yunga yo pa na yin che tata ni kanda sin ro go kan bab go ha go na yin se ne ta tin po ya jang se ne ten ro wa ten kangpa me tsena teni ro go wa ta mu shi ro yo na na shi ta go ma na yang ro go ri ten ro that's antibiotic say go yore.
And so when we actually die, then at that time, there are a lot of thoughts in our mind and a lot of stress and anxiety and fear in the mind. So at that time, it is certainly not easy to do any visualization. It's probably very difficult. But if you train in it well now, then at that time of death, it will be easier for you to remember the visualization. For example, when we get into a situation of an emergency, then very quickly there has to be an escape route. For example, if your house is on fire, then you go out the fire ladder on the back of the house. So the fire escape is already there. So if you have trained well in the poem, then you have such an escape route that when it happens quickly, then you know that this is where I go. And so that is why habituation is essential. And also normally wherever you go and so on, wherever you do, you view everything as illusory. And then when you train in the poem, it is just like your house is on fire and you have a way to go. So when you die, the consciousness then goes through this escape route of the central channel out through the crown. So to be able to do that at that time, we have to habituate or train the mind right now.
다 대다서 장 되니 무슨 레라 자발라 다 대가 공내 해와나기 제때 장 되니 저와 독탑세나 양 도마토바 아 된도서 값수 되니 단양내시고 요래 단양내시 단텔라 다다드는 름바 가셔지 송은 주가 공포와 단 lon군포와 주군포와 되니 다만 포와서는 예언도 진디는 뭐 된도 송은도 대 남주영아서 저 남주영 저 배차 카시는 요 바탕 양 대해서 만들어서 레샤
And so then we have to train. And then when we come to the actual application of the POA practice, that is the time where, as you mentioned before, the signs of death are complete and you have tried several times to avert death, but at no avail, so you couldn't avert death. So at that time, when you come to actual death, that is when you have to practice POA. And there are different kinds of poem. This text here speaks about 4 different kinds. There is the Dharmakaya poem, the Sambhogakaya poem, the Nirmanakaya poem, and the ordinary poem. And also the way it is described here in this text is slightly different than the way in which it is described in several other texts.
대다 나랑 그 람마다 되네 야나 주로 담세 자마 제 따와 제과인바 답균吞바 된다 그 나랑 그제 클로스 그 된다 제 주로라고 요나 또 좋게 동야다 되네 다 담세 냠차나 되게 담지下降세야 되네 랍소나 나랑 잡라만도 요나 되네 제 다 왕다 대한달래게 돈바 인바 삼지 클라스온다고 세야다 나고건 다 왕데 나고건 소병다고 자가 요르와 근데 왕셔야다 파지 담세냥 자담지下降세야다 저 주제데 같이 버리서 요르.
And so then when death is certain, then one should invite guru, a lama, or a dharma friend with whom one shares a very pure samaya. So someone that has the same view, the same kind of conduct as you do, a dharma friend that you're very close to. So you invite this dharma companion and confess all broken vows and samayas. Ideally, if your root guru is there, then you should receive empowerments and take any other vows. And the empowerment actually is the sojong practice of the secret mantra, which is the purifying and restoring ceremony. So receive empowerment and confess any broken vows and samaya. So it is said that these are important practices to do at that time.
Tene tambo tela rap chugum poa sujutela ta nam yung arang nyamli nyamli lo kompa timbo yuni tendre te ta chugum poa ni to sibare ta tela mixa kum poa sene che yo mare ta ngarang laman ro yo no ta gom nyamli ge ko tela yangja che sandem ro si danga to so sandem ro si kwa ka am jo cha ni che so sandem ro sin ne korang pa nyam yala che kurman ro sin tendre che si lo so yo re tene tendre ngani ta nyam ya ka ngani zhong so yin na tene de la ka ra se ga do se na te wo sa ma wen che se na ta ta nga cho ta je nam ju po ye de de pa temrem de so ran ba yin de temne tene chur se yong ba kap so nga nam ju ke che ta nyam len je yo re ti ga ni se na tene te nin re de yo ran ren chue nin re so na yin sin de na tene ti kap so ta chu go lo na sang je ta sang je jang ro 죽은 포화스게 돼 단 냠네데 용선은 상디하는 거예요. 달라 죽은 냠네 죽은 포화스 달라 믹사금 포완도 야고야 강야요 말에 냠네 가는 바 공바 네 조토야 대스고요.
First is the highest, the poa, which is the Dharmakaya poa. And so someone who has practiced really well and has attained stability in meditation practice, it is possible that they become liberated through the Dharmakaya poa. And actually, even though it is called poa, there is actually no special poa to be performed at that time. So there is a tradition of when such a practitioner dies, and if that person's guru is present, then that person can sit next to them and tell them into their ears, again, just to remind them about the practice, about the meditation, to refresh the instructions and so on. And so kind of encourage them to rest within a meditative state. So there's a tradition of doing it that way. And if that person then dies within a state of meditative absorption, then after death, it is referred to as the luminosity, the mother luminosity and the child luminosity merging into one. So when we die, there are various levels of dissolution and that we normally explain. So these happen. And then if one has been a practitioner and has died within the state of meditation, then upon kind of awakening after the dissolution, one awakens into this luminosity of the natural state, which is just like water merging with water. And at that time, one really merges with the expanse of Dharmakaya. So one becomes enlightened, a Buddha at that time. So someone who has trained and practiced the Dharmakaya poa, therefore attains enlightenment. And there is no special poa practice to be performed for the Dharmakaya poa. The Dharmakaya poa means to die within a state of meditation.
이나 다티 값에나 양절 산뎀 라오다 양절 심진 라오데 고사리 다다다다 제왈레 바레스 제왈레 값스단 제와 오사르 추고 모시 바세네 드니 추고롱라 산제 차베 지수 드니 소근이제 단 드바근데 로동 바데메 바데 다든데 영어기 치도 다 다다지 주고론의 상제 전대적인 된바 존을 봐 전대적 대수조당 대응하니 되니 다봐 나랑 그 남중가 냠린 대응하라지 대토다 전대수조대 Tatati Bardo Zatsena than the wa. Danga serving on la Mayan jokes. Danga serving on la Mayan joke. Rane Jimmy Namka Yin post. That is a yore. Rane Jimmy Namka Yin Tandel and Samsala. Better Kakin and Rane Jimmy Chujayan some post and a love yore. But Chujayan post as you take. That's a twin and twin shoe terror. Danga serving on la Mayan joke. Rane Jimmy Chujayan some post.
So then there's this tradition that even though one is a practitioner, that there is someone there who kind of reminds one of the practice, the visualization, the motivation of bodhicitta. So one says that now death has come. So when you then develop this motivation, death has come, I must recognize the luminosity of death, the Dharmakaya. And once I have attained enlightenment in the expanse of Dharmakaya, I then must manifest the two Rupakaya, the two form emanations, in order to benefit limitless sentient beings. So one holds this aspiration and then stays within a state of practice. Whatever practice one has normally done, one tries to just remain within this meditative state. Here in the root text, it says, enter undistracted into clear awareness of the teaching and eject my consciousness into the space of unborn mind. To eject the consciousness into the space of unborn mind, elsewhere in other texts, sometimes it is said, eject the consciousness into the Dharmadhatu space. So that seems to be like more suitable to say. So I enter undistracted into clear awareness and eject the consciousness into the Dharmadhatu space.
That you can forward Chukung on it in the daughter party. Yongona, Katsanya Gondo Shepa, not so the Malam Ganani, the Mo Wasang Musaya. Wasang Musaya down. Da in Togo Gapsayang Aranga Jimba Meba Chama Soma. Then the Jakes and the Tokuyona. The need to go alone, that Chugum poor. Chugolon the Tortova, and the younger your reason. Temato, Tatangazo, Yamlin, Shida, Gom Yamlin Shida, Minki, Kazatilla, that Chuguk poor, Chuguk poor Gomu, said then I am. Kaya Hako, your mother, call it Jew, Mareva. Not so Jume. Chala Kasheke call a labdena, Yamana Chen Roma, Sajati Cola Chekan Labdena, not so Juyo Mare, Tonyo Mare, Ako Mare, Tina yes in it. Gom Yamin Condi Patelo Chukum Poa College Labdena, the Pintoyo Mares.
And so when one practices the Dharmakaya poem, then one may become liberated within the Dharmakaya. And so the other day, recently, we also mentioned the dream state, that within the dream state, we may recognize the ignorance as luminosity. So to recognize luminosity, the luminous nature of the mind. So instead, when we fall into a deep sleep state, instead of falling unconscious, if one is able to sustain luminosity, clarity, then one will become liberated within the expanse of the Dharmakaya, which is then the Dharmakaya poem. So this is how it happens. However, if we are someone who hasn't really practiced so much in their life, if you haven't really meditated so much, and even if you introduce someone like that to the Dharmakaya poem, they won't really understand it because they are just not familiar with it. If somebody talks about something that you're not familiar with, that you never heard before, for example, there's this certain kind of thing that you never heard before, then it doesn't mean anything to you. or if a person speaks about a place that you have never been, you're not familiar with, so you never heard about it, you never saw it, so it doesn't mean anything to you. You don't understand that place. So it's just like that for someone who hasn't really done a lot of meditation practice in their life. The instructions on Dharmakaya poem will not really benefit them.
Oh yeah, Taniba, Longum Poa Sujute, Namjun Hindo Longum Poata, Dina Des and Nakamado. Longum Poa Sujute, Tinga Koning around Sokatam, Poa Jamu Capsu, Mekwaji here Yorova, and around Zoboton Rata, Zawamata, Dina Tile. That Dina, Yinja Gom, then it do the Tachirank, Yadam Tepakan, Chichet Gom, Yana Lama Doji Chankachalo, Yana Kines and Yana Obamendo, Tepakare, Chena, Tenite Gom, anything I call them as on poor Jamu Capsu, Nyamne se Panayi, Jenatini, Mekwati, Nayi Senatini, Hong Senatati, Changanam Hite Yadamka, Kolaya Tim. Ta yang ni yang de ten de sen ta ye dam la te pa tang den ba mu o shu chen bo go ni yang de ten de sen yang le sen de ni ting ani ba xie song wa yin na de ni ye dam da ni se me ban ro cha na ye dam ke long gu ngang lo zhuo se ne ye dam la ni se me ban ro cha na den de ri song wa de la de ni long gu wa se do.
Second is the Sambhogakaya poem, and it is also slightly different than the usual instructions on that. So for the Sambhogakaya poem, we visualize, as mentioned before, the same visualization. So your body is completely empty, and inside is the central channel, and there is the bindu, which is your consciousness. So you meditate on that, and then above your crown is whatever you are mostly devoted to, your Yidam deity, any Yidam deity, or as before, the Guru Vajradhara, or Chandrizik, or Amitabha, whoever you're devoted to the most, you visualize above your crown, and then practice the same visualization that you practiced during the Powa training, so at the time of death then. So as before, where you move the bindu, the consciousness up, and then it dissolves with that Yidam deity. And so therefore practice faith and devotion, fervent devotion, intense devotion for that Yidam or that Guru again and again. So then when you die and you are able to die within such a state of practice, then you merge non-dually with the Yidam deity. So attaining liberation within the state of Sambhogakaya means to merge non-dually with the Yidam deity.
O ta te la nga so nam ju yedam nyam le se yedam ge che ran gom den de sen do ma ta ni yedam la pe te pa chen bo gam chen bo yo na ni te te sa la la won do den de yong ge yo sa re ni te la te ne ye de long ge ko po as ta te nga te go to hong ke ka go re zo je te ta den de che sa ma them na. And
so if you normally have great devotion to the Yidam, if you are familiar with the Yidam practice, the visualization, and you have great faith and devotion to the Yidam, then at that time it will be quite a lot easier. So that's the Sambhogakaya poem. And so regarding the blocking of the 9 doors with the Hong syllable, if that is not so clear, the visualization is not so clear, it is enough if you just think that you know that they are closed by the Hong.
Samba, Tugumpo was a jutela. Naran me bat pe tukso sen de matona mani. Yo yeba salapani. Yo yeba salapadu tini work the now yumbana ni jogo yore. Tendersen ni the young hango Tetaneta, Lamari, Yadanreta, so Mupati Bakarechena, and the Tanka, Bar, Yan Gotosu, Ranking Hangotene, Sham. Taquar and Bochicas on the Lanco, you know that Ningotene Ya. Tini Tela, Yadangu in Sambaka, Tepasi, Mugusi. Teni tela yeji goni ta yela demba chupan pa ya ta sansa wa ta chupan pa ta den bikwa sha pa la so yela demba ka che to ka che shi si teni tende se ne ta ngarang nam shi den den yang ro ne ta ta ti yadam to so ke ko la temro ko yo samba mu pa ta den den ra wo se ko re so yo.
And then a third is the Nirmanakaya poem. And so if you are unable to sit upright, for example, if you're sick, then you can also lie down. You can try to lie down on your right side. It is that if you're lying on your right side, then the breath moves through the left nostril. And then above your pillow, you can arrange a tanka, a picture, a statue of anyone that you have great devotion to, such as your guru or any Yidam deity. So place that above your pillow. Gachin Rinpoche always mentions you can place your prayer wheel at the ground level, like at the end of your pillow, on top of your pillow. And think that the Yidam deity or the guru and so on is actually there. So have this faith, this devotion that they're actually there. And then mentally, you can practice the 7 branches, such as making offerings, like mentally bowing down, prostrating, offering, confessing negativities, and so on, as much as you can practice those 7 branches. And then just think in your mind that the consciousness will go up through the crown and it will then merge. It now merges with the form of the Yidam deity. So it is that one should just have this aspiration that this is happening.
Ini ta mupa siyala ta yedam lama yedam yocho ke tokje ke sala nupa kan tola tine tani ngarang ke semji mambo je la pinta tumni je tani jewa yanjar tanda sen tubuko sen ta terwa rodun ja tembo yoni tani semji mambo ton se tuni je ke tanda sen le
And so at that time, regarding your aspiration, you should think that through the power of the Guru, through the compassionate blessings and the power of the Guru and the Yidam, may I take birth as someone who will bring about the vast benefit of limitless sentient beings. So that's the Nirmanakaya, the aspiration to be born as such a noble being, a great being who is born in order to accomplish the benefit of sentient beings extensively. So one should set one's aspiration thinking in this way.
Tini mikpa yang zone, ta ma ni de na yang, ta mikpa zone tamna di zago ma na tanda sene, na bi ngo tila de yo sa, tini de renpa yin de ya yang ne, nao yung pa ke go la yang ne, tini wok tang len jek de tanda sene ya, chin song san ba sen, mikpa tanda si, yang ne yang de mikpa te na yi zone, ti nga ne tini she song na, tini Drukunrup Senatape, Jewa Zambo Lene, Jixempi Mambo Pintona, Tini Mambala, Tabato to me, the chant of reason.
And so for the visualization here is that even though you're lying down, you try to visualize as well as you can your central channel and the bindu, which has the nature of your consciousness, and how it moves up your central channel gradually. And then actually think that it leaves through your left nostril that you're breathing through together with your breath, with your wind. And so visualize this over and over again. And it is that if you are able to dive within such a state, you take birth as a nirmanakaya, a fine birth wherein you will bring about the benefit of many sentient beings, and in the future, one will attain liberation.
대 탐체는 바 인도 당가란 소체 나차 그런 바 인도 바 시와 그 완도 당네 냠네 던데 직송 요래 야 가시 다 던데서는 바 인도 시가 요 말과 자다 그는 현도고 요래 텔레 직자 그 제와라 안 대다고 그 당나지 가려 요리스나 말아서 남주니 레파트 야 껴올때 하바도 제 현난당 암단도 송어 값을 남산제 request ya jiwo lo de tende gongxi ji lo jiwo lo de ne rang ge dam de yo 3% tende gongxi ji la go res de ya bo gong so na de ne be za da ge na dong ro tende ji cha na ya nam xi de ne yang ro to ba lo pin to yo re song yo re.
So this explanation is like a presentation of the stages that we go through when we die. For example, when one is sick, then gradually one dies, and then one can practice in this way. But then not everyone dies gradually like that. And sometimes something happens all of a sudden, and like some emergency happens, and one experiences a sudden death. And so regarding the instructions for a sudden death is that one should focus one's awareness at the crown on an ongoing basis. So habituate yourself to have your attention, your awareness at the crown, especially when you experience fear. When something happens and fear arises, instantly bring your attention to the crown. If you're able to habituate to that, always having your attention at the crown or thinking that the yidam is at the crown and so on, if you have that habituated, then it is said that even if you experience a sudden death, the consciousness through habituation will go out through the crown.
Teni lamsang chi xianang ji jina ngani de jibchen roma zirana ji. Ma kaxie tenda yore da chik xianang dona jing tona chi yedam teka mayni bhutaba. Tenda chik komshi yore wa. Tenda chik la labya ta. Teni nambiyo ngaranzo chi shiwa zang chepa kapsu namshi tendeni ya jiwa ni rogo samba kun dunba te. Kaduyi na tenda chik kun dunba te jang de na. Teni ti wangke, dunpa ti wangke, teni yang ro sigiri songo yore. Namjoe ngarang so penna, tache sanyi shoka penghao, chutu sumpa gane ya lang je rogo anda wache yena, ta sanyi chutu sumpa gane lango sana tende cheke semla tin dunpa te yo tsavi jiso, chutu sumpa gane ni sege yore. Me te ni toya ke tende mena ya nge ma to solo tende yorwa chuso de yo maro te de on de bala te ne ko to ti to te te ne ni se to ko yore e na yi se na so nam ju de ta kun de ba zong ju te ka chen po cha yore is.
So if you practice a yidam deity on an ongoing basis and you have a strong devotion, faith in the deity, then when you experience fear, something suddenly happens, you will be able to remember the deity immediately and say Tara, call for the deity, for example. Some people really are able to do that. When something frightening happens, then Tara actually appears to them, and they actually see the deity and think of the deity all the time. So it's because they are so close to the deity. And so then when you have trained in that and really are habituated to that, then also at the time of death, the consciousness already is trained to go to the crown. So if you always habituate that, then if you have this aspiration, I'm going to live through the crown, then it is possible to live through the crown by the power of this aspiration. For example, if tomorrow you have to get up early in the morning at like 3 a.m. and go somewhere, and that is in your mind, and you keep this aspiration, you determined, I'm going to get up at 3 a.m. in the morning, then actually, even without an alarm clock, many people wake up naturally at 3 a.m. because this was their aspiration, to wake up at 3 a.m. For example, in the old days, we didn't have alarm clocks, and this is how people would always wake up, really through the power of their aspiration. They determined, I'm going to get up, and then they wake up. So just like that, you form this determination, this aspiration, I'm going to live through the crown. And if you habituate to that, then also at the time of death, it will happen according to the aspiration. So it is that this aspiration is very important.
Teni teta ke nyamle ama to pa teni thamar yina da kargo yoresena da ma hidro yoba kapsu da kola sandem ro kargo yoresena da jiran ke jola teni opa me yoba gom o jine ze yoba gom da jine ze ta opa me de so ke jiran teni jingnang da ngan ra chamal jom ro ri ni song le den ro ri zona ya da kola teta ko goni sandep teta we si jotam teni namshi de yan robe che to de ko je zong le de sa de shuk chung chung go ni zha de san tin ya dang je zong le tu ga de ko me lo mo to ya dang den de se ya dang teni de da we yang je ko da mo chu ba re la na da hi ro yo ba ka su da ngi song jong ge rai teni ma dang da mo chu ba ge ma dang wa ba me ma da ngi song jong la dang je ge ma amjo ke zala danya la so ta thapin da man da so lan sam ba ke ni thapin da man da ta tre se go re song yo ni o ta tre ta na ta tre se ne sam ya go sa re.
And so then how should an ordinary person then practice? Somebody who hasn't done any practice in their life. So what can be done for them? So when they die, then it is good to have someone next to them who tells them, who reminds them, at your crown is the Buddha Amitabha. Visualize Amitabha. Visualize Chinrizik. And the Amitabha or Chinrizik will protect you from all fear. They will lift you out of the 3 lower realms. So remind them in this way. And then as their consciousness then leaves the crown, one can also be at their crown level and pull one of their hairs from the crown or touch their crown softly and not go to the lower part of their body. And so then when there are certain deities also that especially purify the 3 lower realms, for example, there is Akshobhya and Amitabha and so forth. So then you can play the mantra of those deities close to their ear so they can hear. So this is the time then where we have to apply all kinds of methods to help them. So for today, we stop the instructions here.
Oh yeah, ta chwa je ni je la na chok sa re.
So we can have 1 or 2 questions.
Aina, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my question is about the Dharmakaya Powa. There's a video from Garchen Rinpoche about 5 years ago giving Dharmakaya Powa transmission with the Taiwan Sangha. Can Lama Anima explain how to use it and what is it good for? I mean, to have a Dharmakaya Power transmission?
Tini teacher po kolare tini longa ngunla tini Rinpoche Taiwan la yo sorry tini tela link di ninchin chitok video chitok tin ala Rinpoche chuku po wa long nang yo rim tini tanda chuku po wa long dim ting ngaran chu tanda pento khare yo yes tini ting an so kain sin ting an so shiran yaman si tuke yo ma rawa tini chuku po wa long di thona tini an so tanda nyamlen khane chi go res tini pento khare yo res
Ati chukun puwa ka long te ta tso kare lagu yore ti na na maran tso ka te yin ka tong ta pa nyingi hyok chenpo jene. Ta te la ti ne, nyingi hyok chenpo jene, te la ti ne ngaran ka te kare se. Ata nimi ka tong te toya la pinto yungu yore, tap ten ra yore. Maran tso nyingi song do ya te lanjeng la tin song yo ning je chen bo chen ti wang ke ni me ke ye xi te ke dong da de ha ko tini de ren ba yin de ba kong so na tini chu gu ngang de zhuo ya la tel ten de ce ke yo yum chen la tin de zhuo ge yo wa ten de je la yo re zo de gom ja ya re da gom ja ya
So the transmission of the Dharmakaya Poa so mainly is in order to to give rise to an altruistic mind of great compassion, because it is through this mind of great compassion that we can realize the truth of non-duality. Because the reason why we do grasp at duality is because of self-grasping. And if we first cultivate great compassion, then we realize non-dual primordial awareness. And when we habituate to it, then we may become liberated in the Dharmakaya. And so in order to be liberated in the Dharmakaya, mainly we have to meditate. And so like to put that into our mind stream, that is why this transmission is given.
ti na de dong da do do gar song yo re sin ra re je mi chu je yang song po song yo re ba da ngarang zo da da sem la da ni sun jin ba ke da wa yo re ba ni sun jin ba de ni me ge long la da dang po go re is dong da de ding yo re da ngang ro na go yo re
And it really basically contains an instruction. So what this poem really says is that this consciousness is to be ejected into the Dharma Dhatu space, as it says in our text. So this dualistic mind, the dualistic view has to be released into the expanse of non-duality, has to be transferred into this expanse. So it is an instruction that shows that.
Just one continuation from this same question. Then if I want to help someone that just died, can I play this 3-minute video by Garchen Rinpoche to someone that just died?
ta ko la bi ma chu kun po de ngo zhong da de je dang ge ma la sen na pin to kan ya yo ma re chirang la ju me pa je la de na kan ya ha ko ma re wa de de le ta je ta koran yang te po a jang nyung nin je yin na ta koran jang de pa na yin sen na ngo zhong sen na san de sen de ne se ro pa sen na je pin to de che ga ri ma do ta ma ka ya gong ko kon bi ka ya me pa te la chu ko ko la je xie da na te pin to yo ma ri song do kong ta na
So as you mentioned before, if this is a person who has never really actually been exposed to meditation practice, if you introduce them to the Dharmakaya and the Dharmakaya Poa, then they won't really understand that. As you mentioned before, it's like explaining something to someone that they haven't seen before. So they wouldn't understand. What is better to do at that time is to remind them of something that they are familiar with. So if they have practiced Poa before, then it is better to remind them of the various stages of visualization of their own practice. Because if we go beyond that and we tell them about things that they have never heard about before, like the Dharmakaya, they just won't understand that, and then we can't really benefit them. Then if your compassion and your wish to help that person is very strong, then really through the power of that alone, you will help the other person.
Thank you, Lamala. Thank you, Ina.
Oh, yeah.
One more question.
No question?
Hello, Lama. I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me turn on my video. Suppose at the end of life, even though this person's practiced Dharma and even practiced Poa, but they have Alzheimer's or dementia, how can you help them?
Teni chiwe kapla mete kurang chitang kurang mitse kanga teni nyamlen chinyang yoba teni powa yang nyamlen chinyang yoba chi yina cheba da chi yina yang kurang chitwa jingye gi natsa leba natsa chitwa chama jen do gi natsa di chi yona teni di kurang chitin da wo gi mela kropa kana ga gori
Ta ten da wo de la ko ta sombo yin ba kap su je se na ha ko ma re de pa do la le cha du ta dong yang ja ko la san de se de na pa do kap su de ta da na cha yo na ti kap su na cha de yo ma re wa ta da na cha de zu bu ga na cha re ti kap su zu bu ting go yo ma re de de pe wa chang bo cha de yo re and then ti kap su pin to yo hong do re.
So maybe when they're alive, but they have dementia, they don't understand, or they don't remember anything at that time. But because they have practiced it before, once they come into the Bardo, then again things become clear if you remind them. Because in a Bardo, they no longer have this disease. The disease is something that the body has. That they now have, but when once they have died, they do not have this disease any longer because there's no more body in the Bardo. And at that time, their consciousness is extremely bright, very clear. So at that time, for such a person, we certainly can benefit them.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we do a short dedication prayer.
Daddy Lama?
Yeah.
This is Susu. This is a student who has a question. Yeah, the person is asking, can you please tell us about the different signs and when is the best time to actually practice Poa at the time of death? What are the actual specific signs?
That my yimba ke telo ropa sin po nyamle se gona ne pa wokte chema ta de ni ti tu de ya kyuri se yo nam ju. Tene ngarang po nyamle se ne tegin tin ngan ro to tap se na ne ta ngarang pe wo ta chap chimbu cha de ni tin po ka me kwa de ya ni yang de se ne po me kwa de se yimba ngane de ni wokte che so ne tene te ta we yong top si ba re so yo.
If you're the one helping a person who is dying, and you're practicing Poa for them, then the best time is the time when their breath has stopped, when you observe their breaths stopping. That's the best time to practice poa. If you are the one dying and practicing poa, you're trying to die with in that practice, then when your breath becomes like heavy, you should visualize poa again and again, and really have your breath stop while you're visualizing poa. So if the breath stops within this visualization, then it's really possible that it will be transferred successfully.
Shendronyi na da tesar te tatangaran tesar kesarpo yopo kamini yang do po te me pa te si de chogo yore.
And so if the other person is, so before one dies, if the other person is dying, then when the mind is still kind of clear, then one should remember the visualization of poa at that time again and again.
Oh yeah, tati kola tribando na yang aso ti dunta dimana ni sena chogo re.
If you have more questions about this, then we can continue to do that next week.
Dạ, nếu mà bạn có câu hỏi thì chúng ta có thể tiếp tục phần.
Okay.
Can I ask a last question? I have a last question is that understand we have to say 7 hip. The thing is that why is it we have to say 7 hip? And when we are dying, will we be able to say the 7 hip? What can we do if we can't say the 7 hip?
Tati heba kapsu hek dun lagu yo marwa. Ngaso jangu kapsu. Jangu kapsu ta ngaso detang yembe kapsu ni jangoro tata ni jangoro ti kapsu ta tambu tel komri yo mare. Komri me pa tel tene hek mangbu zon me pa ta kale sen ramba yin ro guru. Tene komri cha sa tu hek den zog mare. Hek sam sak par chori chek yang par chori.
So when we are dying, in the moment of dying, we don't have to practice the 7 hik, but we practice it while we are training, while we are practicing, when we are still well and alive. When we're in training right now, we do not have familiarization with the practice. So in order to establish familiarization, we practice the head many times to get familiar with it. And so we many times practice head, and we slowly visualize stage by stage the visualization. But later, after you are habituated to it, there's no need to say 7 heads anymore. Then you can transfer the consciousness with 3 heads, or even just 1. Understand?
Okay. Sanandaya Tamje Zepani Tomnani Bedana Pamzed Yaganandya Balon Rubaya Saban Solan Ruba Yamba Babu Jadan Chimbada Kunda Zambo Dayan Devende Deda Kunje Jiso Dalo Gewan Deda Tamje Rabu Quan cho some jet and bottom, some jet, some Joseph Batam, just Jalab, some Joseph, and Madame Jim, and again number Taji. Some Jim Jabba, the Yen, the